In this video, I'm going to tell you exactly how I write 3,000 words of fiction prose a day. If you are an aspiring writer or a seasoned veteran, some of the things I'm going to talk about may benefit you. So stick around, hit the like button, and subscribe to the channel for future videos like this. I'll preface this talk by letting you know now that I'm not going to talk about any special magic secrets that allow you to just pop out thousands and thousands and thousands of words a day with no effort whatsoever. I am not the be-all end-all authority on this subject matter. What I can give you is some of the tips and tricks and best methods that I found over the course of, say, about 4 years of drafting fictional novels that I feel like have really helped me out and allowed me to really hone this ability to continuously write large volumes of words on a pretty daily basis. For context, I have been writing for, I think, almost 4 years now. I'm currently on my 5th complete drafted novel. And for those of you who say, why on earth should you trust this guy? This is an unpublished, unproven writer. You would be right, but I will let you know now that my debut novel will be published later on this year. So look out for that if you're a fan of the channel. And quite frankly, I'm not going to go over anything in this video that is super secret or special or a trick of the trade in the professional world. These are just actionable tenets of writing, and it's more about work ethic than anything and optimizing your process. That is how you get to 3,000 words a day. When I am drafting a novel, I try to shoot for 3,000 words at least 5 days of the week. That averages to about 15,000 words a week. But here's the thing, you might not always hit those numbers. It's more of a great goal and something to try and hold yourself to, because if you can stick to this, even for a few weeks at a time, you will get so much further ahead. I know a lot of people really struggle with getting just their first 100,000 words written, your first novel fully drafted and even ready to be edited or sent off to agents. So this is more about getting to the finish line, because I think people get stuck up a lot. They get really mucked up on small things that really hamper your progress and momentum as an aspiring writer. So the first thing we have to talk about is what method you use when writing your book. I think it's George R.R. Martin that calls the different types of writers architects and gardeners. Architects being the people who fully plot out their novel beforehand before ever writing a single word of prose, really just making sure they know what's going on before they jump in. And then gardeners being the people who really don't do well from plotting a full outline of their book. They kind of need to get into the weeds and figure things out as they go. I will tell you now that as someone who has a high output of words a day for a not full-time writer, I am a heavy plotter, and I think it's incredibly beneficial. So a lot of the advice that I'm going to give today will be from the viewpoint of a plotter, and it may not apply to every single person who writes a book, as well as especially those who like to sort of fly by the seat of their pants. When I'm writing prose and shooting for 3,000 words a day, I typically get that done in a little bit less than 4 hours. So for those of you who have day jobs or can't afford to write all day long, this isn't about just grinding and writing as much as you possibly can, because I know that not everyone has unlimited hours a day. Some people can only write on the weekends. Some people can only write late at night after their kids go to bed. Some people just have different circumstances, and you really have to mold your routine to your circumstances. And no one can really give you a blueprint for how exactly that looks. So don't beat yourself up if you cannot get to those super high volumes of words per day, because unless you have a minimum of 6 hours a day to do really focused work on writing, it is reasonable to say that I think it's a really good achievement to get even just 1,000 or 2,000 words a day. And for those of you that work a little bit slower, doing even less than 1,000 words a day, that is perfectly fine, because everyone has their own pace. I just want to talk about how to practically up that pace and some of the things that can help you out. So without further ado, the very first thing that really helps me produce high volumes of words every single day is got to be the plotting. Now, typically, I can honestly make another video entirely about the plotting process, and I think I have some tips that could help you out, but I really want to focus on just writing larger volumes of work on a more consistent basis in this video. So if you guys enjoy this type of content, I would be happy to make more videos like this in the future, so just let me know in the comments below. Back to the idea of plotting though, it typically takes me around 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks to fully plot a 100,000-ish word novel. Now, I get ideas very quickly, so don't expect that it only takes you a couple weeks to plot a novel. Some people can take months. Everyone has their own pace, and I would never knock anyone else's pace. But if this is something that you want to do as a living at some point in your life, if you're working towards that, devoting more hours is obviously going to be a beneficial thing. That being said, I can typically plot a novel in around 2 or 3 weeks, depending on varying circumstances. If it's a novel that's the second or third in a trilogy where all the world building is already done, obviously it's going to be a faster process. But if you are starting from scratch on like a fantasy novel where you have to create names and cultures and things like that, obviously it can take you a little bit longer to plot. But plotting before you start writing prose is the most helpful thing to me in getting a really consistent writing schedule and pumping out words. Because the problem that I run into when you're discovery writing, as I think it's Sanderson calls it, that would be the other term for the gardener writer. When you're gardening, the problem is that you have to think too much about too many elements of writing. That's my problem. What I like to do to optimize the process is take all of the guesswork out of as much as I can as possible, because I believe writing prose requires a lot of guesswork, a lot of creating out of nothing. You're writing conversations, action sequences, setting the scene, all the navel gazing, all the things that go into writing prose only complicates things more by not really knowing where your plot or where that specific scene is going before you write it. You don't want to write 300 to 500 words of setup for the scene and then have to stop and really think about where on earth this scene is going in the first place. Not only that, you don't want to get 1,000 words into your writing process for the day, only to find out that you really completely changed your mind on where you thought you were taking this scene. So having a chapter by chapter plot really helps me eliminate a lot of guesswork and focus explicitly on the words I'm writing. So when I step into a scene or chapter for the day, what I'm typically doing is reading over my outline and getting an idea of exactly where I'm going to take this scene. I usually have some leeway in my plot so that I can kind of mold it and stay excited, stay inspired to write the scene. It's not all written out every word for me, obviously, otherwise the plot outline would be in the final book, but it really tells me this person is going to be here, this is what they're going to do, this is how they're going to feel in this scene, and this is the location of the scene, who else is going to be in it, all those little details. It really helps because it turns writing into a bit of a job. It turns it into less guesswork, less inspiration, and more just, okay, I'm executing this scene. Now, obviously, your mood, your inspiration can come into play on how well you execute those things, but if you grind it down into a science in that way before you start writing prose, I believe it really, really helps. The second thing that I feel like really hampers, especially aspiring newer writers, if you're in your first or second year of writing, I see people write incredibly slowly, and I think that's often because people rely, you'll see this a lot on the internet, a lot of authors give this advice, but a lot of people do rely on inspiration hitting them to write. Or, and that's the thing about if you're not writing consistently, if you're only writing on Saturdays, it can be really hard to get into the mood to write. So you might spend the first 30 minutes to an hour of your writing time just trying to get going, and things might be really slow coming at first, and then you might spill out 1,000 words over the course of 45 minutes and then stare at the screen for another hour before writing anything else really substantial. All of these things can happen, but writing consistently at least 5 days a week and on a daily basis really eliminates a lot of that inspiration guesswork, and writing in high volumes keeps you really focused on your story so that it is at the forefront of your mind. If you're having to leave your project and then come back to it days later, or jump into it at a point in time when you you don't want to have to refresh yourself on what you're writing before you sit down to write. You want it to be so right there in your head that you get in and you know exactly where you're going. You get a little refresher, you read your last page or two, and you get that momentum and carry it over day after day. And that's what really allows you to stay consistent, because you might have a day where you get a lot of writing done, but when you're coming in with that momentum from the first day into the second day, it starts to build up and snowball. So I know it's somewhat cliche advice, but I think it's really important to take as much guesswork out of writing as you can, both through your plot as well as by making things consistent, staying in completely and totally focused on what you're doing. A lot of people struggle to get to their first 100,000 words because people also second guess everything that they're doing. And while I totally understand what that's like, I think it's important to realize is that a lot of people just are very fickle over every single word that they write. You're constantly second guessing yourself, wondering if that last sentence was the best sentence it could be. And I know a lot of people have trouble not going back and editing as they write, and that can really slow you down. And if that's part of your process and how you need to do things, that is totally fine. But I strongly encourage people not to, honestly, because especially when you're early on, it's better to get the words out and then come back and fix them later, or delete things or work through them at a later time after you've already fleshed out your story and you know where things are going. You feel like you have at least something of a finished product. Then you can go in and really fine tune things, because the worst thing also, I mean, it's always a growing process, so there's never a wasted word, but the worst thing you can do is, or something that I'm very fearful of doing, is writing 100,000 word plus novel, and also that you deliberate over every single word. It took you 2 years all to find out that your entire premise was based off of a small plot element that ends up being a plot hole, and you have to scratch everything or delete a lot of chapters, go in and revise a ton of things. I think that's why plotting is also important, because you can get a lot of those plot holes out of the way and think about a lot of the different variables that you might encounter before you ever write prose. And I think it's incredibly helpful for allowing you to confidently move forward in your prose writing. Basically, I don't want to be working for weeks and weeks on small portions of a book that might get thrown out later. And if you go ahead and get it out, go ahead and write it, know where you're going. If you need to rewrite an entire chapter later on because you felt like your prose wasn't up to par, because you weren't stressing over every single word, that's okay, because you can always come back and fix it. Now, what can really debilitate you and stop your writing process altogether is getting bogged down and taking too long to get through a book, losing the inspiration for a book because you're in month 8 of the drafting process. There are a million different variables that can slow you down or stop you entirely. That can really just gum up the train tracks and make things really hard to move forward. And that's the last thing you want, because the end goal is to have a complete book. You can go back, you can work on it as much as you want, you can edit it, you can have other people look at it, you can get advice, you can hone it, you can even rewrite the entire thing. But if you don't get to the finish line, at least for the first time, it makes things a lot harder than they have to be. I'll just say that. As from my perspective, as a heavy plotter, it makes things a lot harder. It's also good to think that I think a lot of people focus on really nitpicking every single word that they're writing, which is definitely a good habit to make. But just remember that when you're writing, there are very few authors that are known explicitly for how elegant their sentences are, just how beautiful and poetic their prose is. I can think of a few authors off the top of my head, and if that's what you want to be known for, that's fine. But often your writerly voice doesn't exactly come from overthinking every word or every chapter or the way that you portray your story. For me, it came from writing a lot. It came from getting to the second or third book and finding that really just indulging my whims when it came to writing, the voice that kind of came through in my head, not as me, not as the explicit character, but just the writing style that developed over time from writing a couple 100,000 of words. that was where I started to really find voice. It wasn't in trying to make every single word sound like something that Tolkien would have written or Patrick Rothfuss would have written. It's not about that. I think voice is something that you can really hone. I don't think it's something that you just search for by staring at the blank page and thinking over sentence by sentence by sentence by sentence every little detail. But that's just my 2 cents. In the end, I think it's really just better to write aggressively, get it all out there, get some momentum, because momentum will carry you to the finish line much faster. And I'm not saying to compromise your quality either by any means. I'm just saying that especially in the beginning, if you're a seasoned writer, if you're a professional writer, if you've written a bunch of books and you know what works for you, I don't think you'd be watching this video in the first place. But if you are, there are all sorts of things that you can do to speed up the process. And I think that as someone who was in my first year of writing or writing my first manuscript, the first one is always super, super hard. So this is really about getting there. It's really about trying to build a practice out of writing prose so that you are consistent, so that you are really you have something to look back on and say, I did that. I got that done in the month of January, February, March, whatever it was, whatever time period you're coming out of, you can look back and say, this is what I got done, and I'm proud of that. These are the benchmarks for the success that I'm moving towards. And I don't know, I'm someone who really likes lists. I like to check things off. I want to schedule everything out. So it really helps me to be able to see that kind of progress. So taking you into my mind when writing things, when I start writing prose, I'm thinking, okay, this is the amount of time that I'm going to devote to writing every single day. Like I said, I typically get the 3,000 words, 2,000 to 3,000 words, possibly more, possibly less, depending on the day, done in around 4 hours. Sometimes it takes a complete 4 hours. Sometimes it takes even more, but a lot of times it takes a decent amount less. I can typically write near about 1,000 words an hour, depending on, how much energy I have that day, how much focus I have. But that leads me into the next topic. Now that if you're in my head, your novel is plotted, you've set aside the time, you kind of have the general infrastructure and mindset that you want to base your book around, everything is kind of just set up for you. This is the most important part, and this is the hardest thing to build because it's a muscle. All of writing, I like to take a lot of the guesswork out of and really make it a muscle, a practice. Treat it like a day job, especially if you want it to be your day job at some point in your life. But this is something that doesn't just come easily. And what is that thing? It's kind of an ambiguous term, and that's going to be focus. And that's one of the hardest things to teach. It's because it's affected by so many things. When I say focus, I mean sitting down to write your book and being able to shut out the world. Shut out your stresses, your anxieties, whatever other thoughts that are not relating to that book, being able to shut them out. And not only shut them out, but to start working on your book and get into what many people would maybe call the flow state of your productive time. That is really what allows me to write higher volumes of work in shorter periods of time. And I feel like that's probably what a lot of seasoned professional writers would say as well. It's about being able to learn to consistently sit down and make the inspiration come, not waiting for it. I don't like to say that it's about inspiration at all because that makes it seem like some kind of magic. It's really, the more you treat it like a job, I'm sitting down for 2 hours to write my book, to get 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 words written, then you have a really good structure going in, and you need to be able to walk in and within 5 to 10 minutes of getting reacquainted with your story, start typing. Now, that doesn't mean that's going to happen every single time. I mean, you can easily get stuck up on small details or not really knowing where to take a scene or just not really feeling it in that day. And that is perfectly fine. We're talking about the big picture here, not the little details, because if you can continue to build a big picture that is aggressive, that is creating 2,000 to 3,000 plus words on a daily basis, or 10,000 to 15,000 words on a weekly basis, then that's going to get you to your the completion of your first or second or third novel much faster than it might have before. Because a lot of people will spend an entire year drafting a novel, and that is perfectly fine. That's many professional authors do that. But what I'm talking about is being able to get a first draft of a, say, 100,000 word novel in a matter of 2 to 3 months. It's worth trying to learn to do, in my opinion, because in this day and age where content needs to come out as fast as possible, a lot of the industry around writing and content creation, I think, will, as the times move forward, they will lend themselves to the people that can really create high volumes of work as quickly as possible. I mentioned something along those lines in one of my previous videos, which you can check out on my channel, called, I believe, 5 Ways to Banish Writer's Block Forever, and where I talked about more about inspiration, and it kind of plays into the focus that I want to talk about now. Because sitting down to be able to focus and get into your story and just start typing, get into your flow state, is probably the most important part of producing a high volume of words per day. And I don't know that there's a way to tell someone exactly how to do it other than to practice. But I think it's really important to take a look at your life and what's going on. You can cut yourself some slack if you have a lot of drama going on in your life, a lot of different emotional events coming about, or just millions of obligations that take up real estate in your mind on a very frequent basis. It's okay to cut yourself some slack, but if you really want to be consistent and just drill out these words on a daily basis and finish your novel, I think it's really important to try and minimize that stress that you have coming from other things in your life. And I think if you can clear your mind, that is the first step to getting into that flow state. The flow state can often feel like some nebulous idea, because it almost is. We try to make a science out of writing, not a magic. But when it comes to flow state, some people are just really better at focusing in general than others. But I do think it's a muscle that you train. So training yourself to simply focus, shut out the rest of the world, it can really lead to much better results. I'll say that. Make sure that you're getting enough sleep, that you're eating well, that you're maintaining the relationships in your life and your daily habits and daily commitments in a way that allows you to minimize stress. I know no one can, it's really, really hard to be stress-free, but to minimize that stress and really keep the writing of your book as just your main hobby focus, then you can really speed up that process. It's not for everyone. Some people write a book on the side over the course of a few years, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm speaking explicitly to the people that want to write as much as possible, as fast as possible, with the hopes of making it their career someday, just as I have, because in the end, I'm speaking entirely from experience. But I think that covers a vast majority of the tenets of writing quickly, aggressively, getting a lot of writing done in short amounts of time. In my experience, it's plotting, it's having the confidence to know what you're writing, where you're writing to, and not getting stuck on every single word, and really just focus. I think the most important thing is just not slowing yourself down with overthinking things. If you write a sentence, getting into the nitty-gritty of writing prose, if you write a sentence that you are unsure about, you don't have to rewrite it 10 times before moving on. You might write a sentence that felt okay, and then it might get cut in the editing process a year from now or a few months from now. You might write a sentence that was just kind of a placeholder sentence, and you might be able to rewrite it in 10 seconds after looking at it with fresh eyes on a different day. Does that make sense? It's the fact that when you are not in the place to create, to really hone that one sentence, don't get stuck up on it. Don't labor over it for 30 minutes when you could have written 500 more good, solid words, all for the 10 words that you really just weren't sure about, or you were trying to craft a specific way in that time. There's so many different elements to writing that I can't cover them all in one video. So this video is not going to be able to get into the nitty-gritty of every single element of creating a first draft of a book, but I do hope that these few tenets, these few elements, practices that I try to employ to write high volumes of work are helpful. I hope that they help you think about the way that you approach your writing process. It really is all about focus in the end. You know, if it's not something you want that badly, you can do it on the side. You can take your time with it, and you might get something that you are really happy with in the end. I think a lot of people probably do that, and maybe even sell those books and become full-time writers at some point in their life just based off of a hobby that took them years to write. It's not that there's a right or wrong way. It's just that for the specific purpose of writing high volumes of prose in short time spans, these are my thoughts. I'm going to wrap this up there, guys. If you enjoy this more free form, long form type of content from me, let me know in the comments below so that I can continue to do so in the future. And, feel free to give me suggestions on topics that you want to see covered in the future as well. But otherwise, thank you guys for watching. Like and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video.